So you just got invited to a last-minute interview. Congrats! Now is the time to bring your A game and get prepared as effectively as possible and as quickly as possible. In today's video, I'm going to share my top 6 tips for quality interview prep. Consider it your 6-step crash course to get prepared for an interview at the very last minute. Welcome to my channel. Thanks for being here. I'm Anna. I'm a career coach and resume writer, and in my videos, we talk about how to get you hired for that fantastic job you want and, of course, deserve. When I work with my clients, we don't always have a lot of time to get them prepared for an important interview. For example, last week, I worked with a tech business leader who only had one day to prepare for his interview, and he hadn't had to interview in years. So imagine a lot of work needed to be done in a very limited amount of time after his full day at work. Before I go on to sharing the specific 6 steps that we took to help him get prepared and make sure that he passed to the next interview stage, I want to remind you how flexing your interview skills way in advance can give you a huge head start for any job interview, anytime, anywhere. The biggest myth that a lot of job seekers have is that it only makes sense to start preparing for an interview when you have an actual interview invitation. And I can argue that that is not the case. You know why? Because when it comes to interview success, there are 2 very important factors to consider. 1 is confidence, and 2, connection. If we're talking about the latter, connection, that one certainly does depend a lot on the specifics of the job, the company, the person you're talking to. So indeed, if you don't know a lot about the specific opportunity, you wouldn't be able to do much to establish a great connection. However, if we're talking about the first one, confidence, which is arguably the most important factor in your interview success, that one actually comes with time and practice, and also with understanding some of the fundamental principles of how to present yourself in any job interview, regardless of who it is you're talking to. And the challenge here is to understand the difference in how job candidates think versus how employers think. Job candidates think in their own categories and try to give as much information as possible, maybe try to even memorize some scripts that they Googled the night before, and things like that. Whereas employers think in very different categories. For employers, it's important to showcase specific examples and stories that back up all the other things that you're trying to communicate to them. So, for example, instead of saying that you're a great negotiator, which does not sound credible, and regardless of how confident you are in that, if you simply say, I'm a great negotiator, you can't expect the employers to just believe you. So employers wait for actual proof. And while they're waiting, they may not even ask for it, but it's your job to know that that's what they want to hear. So you don't need to wait for the employer or the recruiter to ask you to bring up specific examples and stories, but rather do it right away to make sure that whatever claims you're making in that interviewing process, you have the goods to back it up. So when you work on your confidence way in advance, you could be 90% prepared for any interview literally anytime. And that prep work that is quite time-consuming and takes quite a bit of energy. But the good news is that it has nothing to do with any temporary effects like memorization or tailoring that to a specific job opportunity. This has everything to do with understanding how to communicate your value, what kind of professional you are, and how to get that message across to the employer, understanding what it is that they want to hear. So really, when you then have a specific interview coming up, imagine fast-forwarding 90% of the prep work and only needing to do the remaining 10% at the last minute. Well, that is a very doable task compared to doing all of the prep work at the very last minute and trying to impress the employer, but then regretting that you didn't quite understand how to present yourself effectively and also didn't discount for the interview nerves that are almost inevitable in an average scenario. If your interview isn't in a few hours and you have a bit of time, I highly recommend that you do some prep work in advance. As you can tell, I'm a big advocate of quality prep work done way beforehand, so you don't need to worry about any of these things at the last minute. And the most important interview question that you need to be prepared for, even if you don't get asked that question directly, is why should we hire you? I link to another video in the description down below where I go in depth into analyzing why employers ask this question and how you can best approach it to make the best possible impression in your upcoming interview. With all that in mind, you still have that last-minute interview coming up, and my job for today is to help you make the most out of the time you have left to get prepared. So let's dive into the 6 steps that'll help you do that. Step 1, do your due diligence. Research as much as you can about the company and recap everything that you know about the business, the people who work there, the product or service that they offer, and any specifics of the job that are most important or most crucial at this point. Really do take the time to analyze the job description very carefully, because often the job description has pretty much everything you need to know, especially for the first round, for the screening round of your interviews. But not many people actually take the time to really read into what it says and understand the top priorities of the organization. Now that that's done, your step 2 is connecting the dots between the responsibilities of the job, so the job description, and your previous experience. And what that means is singling out all the similarities that you can find between what you've done in the past and what is expected in this role, and especially focus on the specific results and accomplishments that speak to the key priorities in the job description. Which brings us to step 3, which is summing up your value proposition. That means answering a simple question: what's in it for them? Unfortunately, most candidates still focus on what's in this for me, and all of their presentation during the interview screams me, me, me. While in fact, if you want to be really successful and effective in your upcoming job interview, make it about them, not you. Now comes step 4, which is updating your story examples using the CAR or STAR methods. If you don't know what those methods are, or you aren't sure if you're applying them correctly to your story examples, I link to another video in the description down below where I go in depth into that topic. Now comes a super important step number 5, preparing the questions you want to ask them. Remember, an interview is not an interrogation, it's a two-way street. And oftentimes, asking smart, insightful, and thoughtful questions at the end can tilt the hiring odds in your favor big time, because most candidates only ask the most trivial questions or maybe no questions at all. So this is a perfect opportunity for you to stand out and show that you've done your homework. And now comes the last step, step number 6. Practice your answer to the question, tell me about yourself. It's guaranteed that any interview at any stage in the process is going to start with that question, because the interviewer will expect you to introduce yourself. So this is your chance to make a great first impression. And I highly recommend that you practice your tell me about yourself pitch out loud. Why out loud? Because in our heads, everything always sounds incredibly great, but somehow when we start speaking, things don't always go according to the plan. So if you practice your pitch a couple times in advance out loud, you are already getting yourself into that interviewing mode. With all of these 6 steps in mind, the one thing that I want you to take away from today's video is this: you are your biggest advocate and your most successful and strongest salesperson. What does a great salesperson do before delivering their pitch? They rigorously research the client. The same principle applies here. If you want to be successful at selling yourself, you need to make sure that you research your audience first and research them as much as possible. That gives you a pretty clear roadmap to how you can tailor your presentation and all the different information that you have about yourself to make sure that you establish that connection that I was talking about with the interviewer, to make sure that everything that you're saying makes sense in the context of this specific job and this specific organization. Think of the employer as your client. And the one thing that all the successful candidates have in common is they go above and beyond to understand their client, understand their priorities, understand their pain points, and make it their priority to signal that credibility instead of going into all the different buzzwords that Google told you might be impressive or effective. So if you think about it, your number one goal for your upcoming interview is to signal to the employer that their priorities matter to you just as much as your own. I hope this video was helpful. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, don't forget to hit thumbs up. If you loved it, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again soon.